Welcome to this edition of the Breeze Blog. Today we're going to finish our three-part series, How Can the Hogwarts Express Make Designing Your Presentation Easier? But before we start part 3, let's review what we discussed in part 2. In part 2, we answered the question, what 2 things will they find on the train cars that will keep them on board and enjoying the ride? The answer was that each of your train cars needs to have a candy cart. By making sure we include things like eye candy, scenarios, quotes, examples, it helps make the ride more enjoyable. We also talked about the importance of making sure each car has a hook, that each car should be securely fastened to the other cars with visual and verbal transitions. Some examples that we discussed were posing a new problem, asking a question, or using phrases that keep attention like, "But wait, the story train doesn't end with the train cars, does it?" No, of course we need a caboose, but we ended part 2 with an unanswered question, and that is, but what's so important about the caboose? And that's what we're going to answer in today's section, part 3. Every train needs a caboose. Okay, maybe Hogwarts Express doesn't need a caboose because it's a passenger train, but your train needs one. Obviously, the caboose is the conclusion part of the story train. Everyone knows you need it, but too often it's left pretty empty. And you really don't want to leave the caboose empty by saying something like, "Well, folks, that's all I have. Thank you. Please leave your evaluations at the back table." You want to make sure your caboose is useful to your objective, so your presentation doesn't just fade out. An easy way to do this is simply revisit the formula that we talked about earlier. This is where you want to remind them of the pain, the conflict, the challenge that you started off with, and then remind them of the resolution that they wanted, and then sum up how your presentation resolved that conflict, eased that pain, solved their problem. That will set them up to take some type of action that you're wanting, whether it's to buy your product or study for the exam or start using those new TPS reports. You'll also want your caboose, your conclusions, to be noticeable. You know, in the olden days, they used to paint the caboose red or yellow, so it was very noticeable, so you could tell where the end of the train was, which helps prevent collisions. So you want your caboose to be noticeable and end with something memorable, something that leaves a lasting impression. It could be an inspiring quote, a challenge to use some of the information you presented, or something to let them know what to do next, besides check their email. Which leads me to the caboose of this presentation. Now, we started off talking about how it can sometimes feel overwhelming putting together a presentation, and how it would be really great to have an easier way. And I think you'll find that this story train analogy can really help you simplify things and make sure your presentations is not only easier to put together, but ultimately it'll be more effective. So the next time you have a presentation to put together, think of it as a story train and make sure your engine has enough steam in it. Your train cars are hooked together and each have a candy cart, and make sure your caboose is painted red. Do that, and it will be a lot easier to get to Hogwarts Castle than in Ron's dad's car.